Hello, everyone, and welcome from the cluttered office of the Lepanto Institute. Um, Again, please forgive the mess behind me. We are, in order to build our case from the bunker in Stafford. All right. Um, Everybody's all hunkered down, I assume. So, anyway, why don't we give it just a minute to allow people to make their way in, and then we'll get started with a prayer. Make sure that everything is working properly and sounds good and all that good stuff. And Therese, good to see all of you. All right. Just to make sure you guys can hear me, right? Yeah. White circle again. Hey, Patricia. So Therese is getting a white circle. Is anybody else getting that, or is it okay? Mike says sound is good. Hayden says 5 by 5. Therese, I'm wondering if maybe it's your internet connection. I mean, you seem to be getting the most trouble every week, so I don't know if it's really on my end. Okay. We've given it about a minute, so why don't we go ahead and start with a prayer? Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum. Benedicta tu in mulieribus et benedictus fructus ventris tui. Pray for us. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Okay. So lots of big news to go over real quick. And what I'm about to tell you, I'm going to ask you to keep in total confidence. You guys are Inner Circle members, and that's why you are Inner Circle members. You are given the information first. So earlier this week, well, actually yesterday, not just earlier this week, but just yesterday, we published our latest report. And if you haven't seen it, let me go ahead and post it in the chat box here. We posted our latest research on Catholic Relief Services. And what we showed in this particular report is that CRS set up another referral network, this time in Nigeria. The one last week was Cameroon. It was the Kids Project. Created a referral network that included organizations that are associated with Planned Parenthood, but all that kind of stuff. But the key is that these organizations were promoting abortion. And it didn't occur to me while we were conducting the investigation because, I'm not well versed in law or government policy. But my associate who works for me asked me the question yesterday, did CRS violate the Mexico City policy by giving money to these organizations? And I thought that's a good question. I don't know the answer. So I put out a query on Facebook asking asking my legal scholars and my government policy scholars and people who are in the know that know better than I do, who are on Facebook, whether the reports that I'd been putting out the last few weeks indicate that CRS violated the Mexico City policy. And a little bit of digging. What we found, so just for those who don't know, the Mexico City policy indicates that those who are trying to or those who are receiving federal funding are not to provide any requests for information or promote or advocate for or perform abortions. And initially, in the first Mexico City policy, when it was drafted in 1984, this only pertained to family planning programs. This did not pertain to programs regarding maternal health, people living with HIV, and various other aid programs. So it was kind of a weak policy. It sounded good, but it was technically a weak policy because what you wind up having is a policy that was very narrow in scope. So it limited funding to groups like Planned Parenthood because that's really all they do. And the only grant information that they would apply for would be family planning. So it basically was a slam against Planned Parenthood. But the the other side of it, what Trump did in 2017 when he reinstated the Mexico City policy, he extended it to just about every element of aid and development work. So regardless of what the project was, were to be denied federal funding. So it's a brand new approach to the policy, and it was very strict. And what we found is that with the Kids Project, where CRS was partnering with an organization called Renata, Renata, and this is in Cameroon. CRS was facilitating funding to this organization and including them in the referral network. And this organization, Renata, in 2018, was actively advocating for the legalization of abortion. So this is a very clear, cut and dried case of a violation of the Mexico City policy. Then what we found, and going back over our notes from the last report, and in this last report, what we focused on that CRS included in their referral network. And Girls Power Initiative is, I mean, the founder of the organization said that she set it up in order to advocate for abortion, amongst other things, but that was one of the founding principles of the organization, was the promotion of abortion. So if we can find proof, and I'm sure we do, that they were advocating for abortion during the project period after 2017, case closed. With regard to another organization called Renata, or not Renata, Action Aid, this organization states as one of its mission statements the legalization of abortion. And we have absolute proof that throughout the project period, they were absolutely doing that during the time that CRS was giving them money. So again, the Mexico City policy, it wasn't just in relation to organizations that were applying for grants from the federal government in order to implement these programs. It had specifically to do with organizations that were the prime on the project, even facilitating funding to agencies that were providing or performing or promoting abortion. Which means, and it'll take a legal mind to say for sure, but given the evidence, I feel very confident in saying that CRS violated the Mexico City policy. So we've been in touch with, and again, this is just for you guys. Don't spread this. Don't share this. Don't talk about this. We're working on this. We lodged a formal complaint with the Department of Health and Human Services. So it will be very interesting to see how this plays out. From what I understand, there is strong interest in the case that we've built. And, well, all I can say is pray. Pray that Our Lady uses this information in order to achieve her victory. This is her victory, not ours. So that's where we are. I'm rather excited about it. I'm containing my glee, but I am very excited about this because Uh, it's one of those things where either way, CRS is will find itself in a checkmate type situation. Let's say they find a loophole. They find a loophole and they're able to say, well, no, technically, based on this legal whatever and these statements and the way the government operates, blah, 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 we technically did not violate the Mexico City policy. In so doing, they have to admit that they were providing funding to an organization that was promoting abortion. Or, on the other hand, supposing that Catholic Relief Services is guilty, CRS is guilty of violating the Mexico City policy, which is a massive, massive scale scandal, a massive scandal. And suddenly the bishops have to answer questions that they really don't want to answer because they've been very vocal in support of the Mexico City policy. So what do you do when you, the bishops, are loudly advocating and supporting and promoting the Mexico City policy? We love this policy. This is great. And then they find out that their number one overseas development and aid charity is in direct violation of that policy. How do they handle that? It's going to be very embarrassing for them. But it didn't have to be this way. I tried going to them in private. I tried helping them to correct the problem, and they blew me off. So we're going to the appropriate authorities, and suddenly this is turning into another kind of another kind of battle. Here's something that's very interesting. Just before we published this report, because I'd finished it, I knew that it was damning information and that it was going to cause all kinds of problems for CRS. I prayed very much to Our Lady, and I asked her, I said, I'm not looking to make a big public splash with this report. I just want to make sure that it gets into the appropriate hands of someone who can do something about it. And what seems like pure accident, which isn't pure accident, Our Lady guided this report and put it directly into the hands of the ones who can do something about this. So I don't claim victory for this. I don't claim any kind of cleverness on my part, because quite honestly, it didn't even occur to me to think, I wonder if CRS is violating the Mexico City policy. It was an idea that was given to my associate, and he took that idea, gave it to me, and by the cooperation of grace, we have found that Our Lady provided this report or delivered this report to the individual who needs to see it. So we thank Our Lady. We praise her for her guidance, for her help, and for, by the way, before we continue, just give me an update. How is the sound, the video quality? Are we still okay? Are things hiccuping? Is it a regular interruption? Please let me know, because I do want to have an interaction with you here about the fog of war on this morning's topic. So just let me know real quick how things are going. Intermittent arrows. Okay. Some interruptions, but sound is fine. Okay, on that end. Okay. Okay, good. Good. I made sure to plug in, so hopefully it'll remain stable. All right. So let me read to you the definition of the fog of war. The fog of war is the uncertainty in situational awareness experienced by participants in military operations. Excuse me. The term seeks to capture the uncertainty regarding one's own capability, adversary capability, and adversary intent during an engagement, operation, or campaign. Military forces try to reduce the fog of war through military intelligence and friendly force tracking systems. The term is also used. We have in this current coronavirus situation is the fog of war. There's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of confusion. And because of that, we are in what we need to understand is the very definition of the fog of war. I live not very far from the location of the Battle of Chancellorsville. And for those of you who don't know the history of the Battle of Chancellorsville during the Civil War, what happened was late one night after routing some enemies, some Northern Yankees, uh, General Stonewall Jackson had taken some men and routed them and pushed them off. Upon his return to home base, there was a very thick and heavy fog that had filled the area. And as he was returning, everybody was on edge. Everybody was panicked. It was like a powder keg just waiting to explode. And he was returning with some of his own men, and they cried halt and asked for the password, but before they were able to even respond, someone fired a shot. And when that shot was fired, it started a back and forth volley. And what happened in this back and forth volley is nobody knew who they were shooting at, where they were coming from, or even what was really going on. They had no idea. It was a panic, and it resulted in catastrophe because Stonewall, he was seriously injured. Finally, they were able to get all the shooting to stop, and it didn't take long for everybody to realize the full horror of what had taken place. The most brilliant general in the entire Confederate Army was very seriously wounded. And so they took him to the hospital tent. The hospital tent tried to take out the bullet, realized that the damage was too severe, and they had to cut off his left arm. At receiving the news of this, General Robert E. Lee, okay, it's going in and out. Let me do this. Let me double check my speed real quick. Very certain that I should be quite high, so it shouldn't be too. My upload speed is 36 megabytes per second. So this shouldn't be an issue. Let me make sure that nobody else is interrupting here. No? I don't know why. I hate technology sometimes. I don't know why it's doing this. The only other thing that I can think to do is use another program. The fog of the internet link, yeah. The only thing I can think to do is to use another program. Maybe use Zoom or something like that, because this is, I don't know. YouTube is not being very kind to our purposes, so that may be an issue. All right. Well, and when he heard that Stonewall Jackson had lost his left arm, that Stonewall Jackson lost his left arm, but I have lost my right arm. In other words, without Stonewall Jackson, Robert E. Lee knew that he was at a sore disadvantage against the Union Army. That was the fog of war. And that was how the fog of war actually causes we are in the coronavirus, in the midst of the coronavirus lockdown. I think it's safe to say that many of the leadership in the civil authorities and many of the leadership in lost the screen. It's weird. Try refreshing. So about what's going on, that they're shutting everything down. Here's what gets me. Okay. Program completely dropped. You know what? I'm going to look into Zoom. Let's see, Zoom video conferencing. I might just try using Zoom next week. I'll look into Zoom. You can see fine. It's okay there. Okay, so a lot of this is on other people's end. I wish I could do something about that, and I really can't. So anyway, I'm just going to have to continue. So the civil and spiritual authorities here are losing their cool. They're losing their heads, and they are overreaching. They're overstretching with their concern to try and make things work the way it should. The panic on the coronavirus, that we need to defy the authorities. Just look at this whole thing as a massive conspiracy set up in order to try and bring down the Trump presidency, because it's an assault on the economy, it's an assault on his integrity and his leadership, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So let's go out and let's defy the authorities and continue on as if nothing is wrong. At which point we'll go ahead and risk arrest. We'll risk possible spread of contagion if there is such a thing. That's one side of it. The other opposite extreme is let's hole up and completely wall ourselves in, not go anywhere, and yell at every darn it, they just might spread contagion and someone else will die. Both reactions are wrong. Both reactions are wrong. On the one hand, we individuals are not in full knowledge. We do not possess all of the intelligence, all of the information regarding the scope of the battlefield. So to walk out in the midst of the fog of war and say, you know what, I don't actually believe that there's an enemy out there. I'm just going to walk out and risk it. And what are they going to do? In the middle of a battle or on a battlefield, you've got fog. And the general tells you, everyone stay your post. Do not move. Do not go out. And a group of people says, General doesn't know what he's talking about. In fact, I heard that he's actually an enemy and working for the other side. So I'm going to go out there. I think that he's just trying to keep us from continuing on with the war as we should. And so they get up and they walk out onto the battlefield. And what? Because they don't know what's going to happen, and they don't know what's really going on, and they don't have all of the intelligence, and they don't have all of the information, they risk something very, very serious, which is alerting the enemy to their presence, being shot, and drawing fire that will kill. Everyone has to get down. They all have to keep their heads down. They're, everybody hole up and make sure that they don't do anything. They're going beyond the simple order of the general. And they are shutting themselves off and creating a walled up mentality. Rather than just staying their post, which is what they should be doing, they go out, or they wall themselves up and they take themselves out of the battle completely. So here's the situation with our battle. What is the battlefield? What are we looking at? What we're looking at is a situation where civil authorities have made it impossible for us to attend Mass. Ecclesial authorities have gone beyond the compliance of what civil authorities have said, and they've said dying at this point is right now illegal. You're not allowed to die because if you do, you're not going to get a funeral. So they've shut down they've closed us off to the reception of communion. It doesn't mean that masses are not being said, because masses are being said in private by priests. But masses are not being said or not public, so we are not able to receive communion. What's the net effect of that? We have to think about this. We have to think with confusion. But if we stand above the smoke just a moment, then we can get reoriented and we can try and wrap our head over what's really happening. And this is what I think. What happens when we receive communion? It's a simple question. At Mass, now everybody says the Mass is the Mass. The Mass has all these graces attached to it, and it's absolutely true. But every time the priest distributes communion to individuals, those members of the congregation become living tabernacles. We become imitators of Our Lady because we contain Christ within us. We become living tabernacles. The tabernacle is like a lamp, and the reception of communion is turning up the wick. As long as you're in a state of grace, you're turning up the wick, and that light becomes a little brighter. After the reception of Holy Communion, you wind up going out into public, the world of darkness, and you bring that brightened light with you in order to brighten the darkened. And there was a part of the movie which had some I was very shocked. I didn't expect this in this movie. All of a sudden, there were women prancing around in very skimpy bikinis. It was rather shocking. I immediately closed my eyes, and when I did, a thought popped into my head. And the thought was, my eyes are not my own, they belong to the Lord. And I realized, well, of course my eyes are not my own, they belong to the Lord, because when I receive communion, I have my Lord within me. And so, with Him inside me, He sees through my eyes, He acts through my hands, He speaks through my mouth. And what I expose Him to is my action, and it causes Him to retreat. That's the effect of sin. So I close my eyes. I guard my lamp. I guard the light within me. And so when we receive communion, we as living tabernacles are not our own. We become living tabernacles. We bring Christ to the world. By suspending all public masses, who's the enemy in this particular battle? Now, spiritual communion is something that we can all receive, but it is not the same. A spiritual communion does allow us some union with Christ. So, who's the enemy? The enemy on this particular battlefield is the devil. What does the devil want? The devil wants greater influence in the world, greater power over men, and to stamp out the light as much as it can. That's what the devil wants. So, why does the devil want this now? What's his end game? What's his goal? Here's the thing: when we consider the nature of light and dark, darkness is not a thing, light is. Light exists, darkness does not. So shadows and darkened alleyways and when you're in a dark room, the dark is not a thing. It doesn't actually exist. What it is, it's a privation of light. It's a lack of light. This is what it means that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was made flesh. And it goes on to talk about the light and the dark, and how the dark did not overcome it. The dark cannot overcome the light. If you flick a switch, you can't turn on a darkness switch. You can only turn off lights. So by not being able to turn on a darkness switch, and because light banishes darkness, in the same way, grace banishes evil. This is why Our Lady can cast out demons with a look, because she's full of grace. She is full of the light of God. She's a living tabernacle. Her gaze, when she looks at a shadow, it's like shining a spotlight on a shadow. The spotlight disappears. It's the same thing. So for the devil to gain more power in the world, he needs to darken the light, needs to turn the light down. So he has to convince a bunch of Catholics, Catholic prelates and priests, that they have to put their lamp under a bushel basket. And that's what we're doing. That's what's happening in the church. So, how do we handle that? How do we address this? How do we go after it? How do we make a decision process that allows us to figure out what to do in response to this? See, you ask a very good question. Why can't we receive communion from our cars and have Mass outside? There's no reason why we couldn't. There's field. Having Mass said outside, and while bombs are exploding around them. This has happened. And interestingly enough, those men received communion. And to my knowledge, I could be wrong, but to my knowledge, there's never been anything wrong with distributing communion and hearing Mass in the middle of a battlefield. And the graces that these men receive, even if they die right after Mass or even in the midst of Mass, their souls are enriched. And the light of God is brought further into the world. But here we have bishops that are saying, we need the darkness. We need to retreat. We need to withdraw the light from the world. And so the enemy is able to move more freely. The enemy is able to say, now I can have my way. So what is it that's happening? What is the devil trying to accomplish? I mean, it's not like this is going to last forever, because it's not. There's a finite amount of time that these bishops can withhold public masses. They're not going to be able to say, this is the new norm. This is the new normal. We're going to maintain this in perpetuity. They can't do that. It's not going to happen. I guarantee it's not going to happen. So what's the end game? Looking for souls on the individual scale. we can say that the devil is looking to starve us. It's almost like a siege. It's like a siege. The 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 citadel has been surrounded by an enemy army, and we no longer have access to the food. We only have the stores of food that we contain by our prayers and remaining in a state of grace. If we should fall out of grace, God forbid, but if we should fall out of grace, then we are ripe for the picking. I'm going to get into Easter here in just a moment. Because in some places, Easter Masses has already been canceled. And that's where I'm going with this. The devil is trying to suppress the Mass for the holiest of days of the entire year. The day where the grace of God shines brightest in this world, Resurrection Sunday. The devil is trying to suppress. It's already been done here in Virginia because Governor Northam, Governor Blackface here in Virginia, has made it illegal with a penalty of up to a year in prison. It's a misdemeanor, but up to a year in prison and a fine of $2,500 should 10 or more people gather in one area for non-essential services. And the Mass has been deemed non-essential. How foolish. Without the Mass, the world would end. Plain and simple. So, the darkness is increasing, and it is increasing on the holiest of days. So, what is the devil working towards? What's he trying to accomplish? From April 21st to April 29th, the occult has, if there is going to be a terrible, terrible, wicked, satanic ceremony during the octave of Easter, during a time when the bright light of the church has been cast into darkness, dimmed. That's what I think is really going on above the smoke of this fog of war. Is that the devil is trying to darken the world so that it can move more freely and do something dastardly. What that thing is, I do not know. I saw a video yesterday that was very interesting. There was a woman who was talking about the lady that was just put in charge of the coronavirus task force. Her name is Deborah Birx, PEPFAR, back in 2014. And, excuse me. And what's interesting about her is that she has connections with George Soros. She's definitely an enemy of God, just given the things that she promotes. And her name came up recently as I was putting together my next report on CRS, because she created the project that I'm exposing that CRS. So as soon as I heard her name mentioned, my ears perked up and I paid attention. It turns out that a little bit before the impeachment hearings, she was responsible for increasing an extraordinary amount of funding from PEPFAR to the Ukraine. And who were they appealing to in order to provide evidence against Donald Trump? It was the Ukraine. I can't say for sure that there's a connection, but Trump just recently put her in charge of the coronavirus task force. I don't yet know what this means of grace being cast throughout the world by the suppression of the masses. I wonder if this has something to do with what's coming, with what the devil is going to attempt. So, how do we work on that? How do we come to a decision tree on what to do? Well, for Donald Trump, if he were to approach it from the decision making of a moral theologian, he starts with, I can't do evil. So let's avoid evil and do good. That's the basic teaching of moral theology. So what is the good? Do you close down civilization and let the economy go to rot? Or do you let people go about their business and risk a loss of life because of inaction? Well, clearly there has to be some action because as the leader of the country, he is in a position to have better information. He's in a position to know what the dangers are. He's going to be fed a lot of disinformation, and he knows that the people surrounding him are trying to get him out. They're trying to undo his presidency. They'd love nothing more than to see him leave. He knows this. So he has to make decisions based upon information that he's given and then disinformation that he's given. He has to err on the side of caution, which is why we have a current lockdown. But he also understands and recognizes that he can't just close society indefinitely, which is why, incidentally, he's been advocating for churches to continue to pray and to be allowed to be a public witness. It's a rather interesting thing that he's done. And I think that he is in a very difficult position, and he needs a lot of prayers for the proper guidance that Our Lady can give him. We've started our 9-month Christmas novena, and my wife and I have included him specifically as one of our prayer intentions. And I encourage all of you to do the same. So his decision tree has to be how to mitigate damage done without going overboard. And I think he's finding the right course. He's question sent it in just before we started. Should the church challenge the new order by the governor of Virginia regarding making church gatherings illegal? And I think the answer is yes. I think the answer is yes. If people are immunocompromised and they are very concerned about contracting the coronavirus, and let's be clear, and because I have friends that have contracted the coronavirus and it's very nasty. Alexander Schlugel, who is now out of the hospital, was in the hospital because of the coronavirus. I also suspect, I can't prove, I don't know for sure, but I suspect that my family had suffered the coronavirus in our own household back in January. Because in looking at the symptoms that we had for this really, really bad flu that we all had, all of us had a high fever, except for me. Well, my body temperature is odd anyway. But everybody in my family suffered a very high fever for several days, and it wouldn't go down. I mean, it would go down a little bit, but it wouldn't subside. It wouldn't break. It lasted about 3 or 4 days, this fever. Some of our kids developed a cough. I developed a cough, but it didn't last. As I'm looking at the symptoms of people who have lessened effects of the coronavirus, a lot of what we went through is very similar to what they're reporting. Not everybody gets a cough from the coronavirus. Not terrible. And we all felt terrible. But, we stayed home. We didn't go out to infect anybody. We stayed away from people. And I think that, and they're starting to find that there are a lot more people that have had the coronavirus that they realized. The thing spreads very quickly. A lot of people are getting sick, but the drastic hospitalizing effects are not as prevalent as they thought. So, should the church challenge the governor and his decision to lock down and make illegal church gatherings? I think so. And I think that the immunocompromised have a right and a dispensation to stay home out of fear that they will have a very serious effect from the coronavirus. I should get a serology test and see if I have the antibodies of COVID-19. You know what? I should. I don't know where in our area to go for that, but I think that you're probably right. I think I should try and get tested just to see if that's what we had. But I do suspect very much that that is what we had. It was a flu like we'd never had. Yeah, I mean, it seemed like the flu. It was the only thing we knew to call it at the time. But I think it's very likely that that is what we had. So, yes, I do think that we should challenge it. I think that the governor should be challenged on that, especially for Easter. And I think that the faithful should be allowed to attend Mass and to participate in the Mass, receiving Holy Communion without fear. I can't think of something even remotely close to the situation that we are in. I think that there's a lot of panic, but we have to keep a cool head. They won't waste testing on healthy people. Well, okay. And that's where we are. That's those are my thoughts on this. And that's why I brought in the fog of war. Have gone bare because everybody's panicking. I saw a video of a fight that took place where some very large women had stockpiled a shopping cart with probably close to 400 rolls of toilet paper. And another very large woman tried to take just one of those rolls off her shopping cart, and it started a fight because they had taken the entire supply off the shelf. That's what panic does. It makes us do stupid things, and it turns our neighbors into our enemies. That's not what we want to accomplish. We need to keep our eye focused on who the enemy really is, which is the devil, and what it is actually trying to accomplish, and that's the darkness of the world. And if the devil's trying to accomplish the darkness of the world through the suppression of the Mass, then our response is maintain spiritual communions, ask Our Lady to guide us and to help us to get back to Mass as quickly as possible. Because we don't have the decision to open the doors of the church. We don't have the ability to make sure that the bishops are not suppressing the Mass. So we have to do what's possible. All right. I want to take some questions because I only had a few thoughts on this, but if you have questions or if you have some comments that you'd like to discuss a little bit further in this regard, or if there are any other concerns that you'd like to discuss, go ahead and type it into the chat box and let's go ahead and discuss. Okay, so Christine says, they are allowing the test because it is very important to the medical community to know who is immune so they can care for the newly infected. That's very interesting. It's very interesting. I could always ask. What would I have done if I were a bishop? To be honest, I would have I would have permitted uh, mass outside. I would have told my priests to allow tents to be set up in order to have mass outside. And because if the governor's order is that there aren't to be these gatherings, but you have to maintain social distancing. Well, you can have social distancing outside because the governor said if you go to a park, that's fine. Just maintain social distancing. Fine. So set up the mass in a park. You don't have to be packed in a tight area. There are ways around it. You just have to be creative. Be as wise as a serpent and gentle as a dove. So have mass outside. There is nothing wrong with that. And what the priest can do is distribute communion one at a time, purifying his fingers after each communion. Distribute communion on the tongue, purify the fingers, distribute again. It'll take longer, but when you're receiving a gift of infinite grace, who cares how long it takes? And I would dispense those who are immunocompromised and say you don't have to go to Mass. You should observe pious practices on Sunday in order to maintain your Sunday obligation. But as bishop, I wouldn't require those people any more than I would require somebody to go to Mass when there's an ice storm that has blanketed the roads with a sheet of very slick ice that could cause car accidents and people could die in those. I wouldn't require that. So if there's a dispensation for that, there could be a dispensation for this for people who are immunocompromised. That's what I would do. And I think it's a very creative and simple solution. But the bishops are cowards. They're cowards and they're afraid of any kind of challenge or any kind of creative solution. And so they're just shutting everything down. But that's what I would do. Anyone else? For my birthday last month, I got this fidget. And I have found that fidgeting with it actually helps my thinking process. So if you hear a little clicking sound, that's what it is. The rules need to be made on based on actual virus tests. Yeah, I agree. I think that now nobody is disputing how contagious this thing is. It's very contagious. What people are disputing, and I think rightly so, is how severe it is. To the immunocompromised, it's very clear that it is a very dangerous illness, and that's fine. But it's also clear that the net effect is basically a very bad flu, a bad flu that could lead to death. And the flu kills people. I mean, let's be honest, the flu kills people. And during flu season, if somebody's immunocompromised, they're not required to go to Mass at those times. But we don't shut down the entire society because of a bad flu season. You know, like I said, in the fog of war, it's most important for us to keep a level head. Don't panic. Have you read any direct response from a bishop regarding release of the CRS report? I have. There is a letter that was circulated among the bishops from Bishop Caggiano, who is the head of Catholic Relief Services. He's the chairman of the board right now. Yes, it might have been last week. Yeah, I think it was last week. No, maybe I don't remember. My weeks are blending together at this point. Anyway, I went through line by line what he said in his letter. So if you want to go back to the archives and take a look at what he said in his letter the last couple of weeks, I analyze it pretty thoroughly and point out the glaring errors in what he said. So, but yeah, that's the only direct response. Everything else has been the same old usual. pay no attention to the cranky Hitchborn and the dastardly Lepanto Institute. They don't know what they're talking about. We always do things that are in line with Catholic teaching, blah blah blah. And so that's the line that they're feeding, and anybody who writes in and says, I'm upset that you guys are doing this. So, but as I pointed out at the beginning, by submitting a formal complaint with the Department of Health and Human Services, I'll wait because I know that there's a lag. I think it's about a 20 to 30-second lag. So if I say something, you're not actually hearing me for about 20 to 30 seconds. So when I say, go ahead and ask me a question, I know, okay, it's going to be 30 seconds before they hear me. And so then I have to wait another 30 seconds or so to hear you guys. So I'll just blab or whatever here for a few seconds and wait to see if there's any other question that comes through or any other talking point that anybody wants to cover before we close. This thing's cool. Look at this. So it's, you ever see a Jacob's ladder? It kind of reminds me of a Jacob's ladder. It opens this way and it folds, then it closes, then it opens, then it folds, then it closes. I don't know. I'm amused by very simple things sometimes. Rice bowls are still surfacing. However, the churches are closed. Yeah, it's very interesting. In fact, just this past week, I don't know if you guys saw it, but Catholic Relief Services said that they're going to start applying for federal funding regarding the COVID virus because, gosh, what do you know? They're not getting as much funding in the pews due to the suppression of the mass and everything else. Finances are taking a huge hit, and so now they're looking for more government funding. Go figure. Okay. Why don't we go ahead and close with our prayer? And if another question surfaces afterward, then we'll see what brings where things go. I never know what I'm going to talk about from week to week, but with Our Lady's guidance, we'll have another good conversation. So let's go ahead and close with a prayer. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum. Benedicta tu in mulieribus. Pray for us. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. All right, let's see. Two things. The problem all started because the church decided to take federal funding and partner with the world. Absolutely. The world is Christ's enemy because the world hates Jesus. Well, it's the whole Judas problem, right? So what happened? Judas took money from the apostolic coffers for 30 pieces of silver. I'll hand them over to you. And that's exactly what's happening now. And guess what happened after the crucifixion? Annas and Caiaphas, who were bloody enemies with Pontius Pilate, became best friends with him. They became very close. They hated masks. What support are you getting from other Catholic organizations like yours? So LifeSite News, Church Militant have been very supportive of my research. They've been actually rather instrumental in trying to get this information into very key hands. And Population Research Institute has been very supportive of what we do, as has Human Life International. So there are other organizations that are very supportive of what we do, but they assist where we conduct our research and get things out. So it's been a very, very good relationship we've had with organizations like them. There are international agencies we've been working with as well that have been very helpful in spreading the word. So continue to pray for all of our friends, all of our allies. We're in this together. So the victory is Our Lady's heel. So here we are at the end of our session. Why don't we all think to kiss the heel of the lady who crushes the head of the serpent? All right. So good day to you all. God bless you, and I will see you next week, God willing.